to everybody who's here all the time, who's visiting, who's here every time they can be. I'm reminded, like Dan said, of the present, the gift that it is to us to be together. When we get to come together and we get to sing, there's something about being together, singing together, worshiping together, praying together. It's not for him, right? It's for us. There's a song I've heard called Ain't No Rock. Have you all heard this one? It says, there ain't no rock gonna cry in my place. As long as I'm alive, I'll glorify his holy name. There is something about the singing here today that makes me think that's a sentiment all of us hold very true. Man, it's good to be here. There's something happening in the world lately. I don't know if you guys are aware of it. Certainly, there's a present awareness of the things we can't control, as Tad mentioned in his prayer, of the wickedness, the evil, the things that are moving the world that seem to be having a very negative impact right now. It seems as though, while we know it's there, it's much more present and real right now. The other part of that is that we believe in a God who is able to work through suffering and darkness to achieve his purpose. And that's happening too. I don't know if you guys know this, but statistically right now, church attendance is on the rise for the first time in decades. Statistically right now, interest in the Bible, interest in God is higher than it has been in a long, long time. Here's what this means, okay? Here's what this means is that on average, okay, the people that you are interacting with day to day are much more likely to want to have a conversation with you about the Bible right now. They're much more likely, statistically, they're more likely to want you to invite them to church. They are statistically far more likely to believe in and follow God right now, okay? Now, does that mean everyone? No, it's sort of the law of statistics. There's a balance. Fun fact, did you know that if you poll 1,000 people on how many jelly beans are in a jar, the average of all the guesses usually ends up being right? Right? So not every guess was right, but statistically, people, when we say that blanket, throw that blanket statement out there, people are far more open right now than they have been in a long, long time. There are going to be a lot of reasons for that. Right? There are going to be a lot of different motivations behind why people are more open. But what we're seeing across the country, at least, is that people are far more open and far more interested than they've been in a long, long time. I think that's good news. And I think you all know what I'm going to say next. Go talk to them. Yeah, of course. I'm going to go tell you right now, please go talk to people about the Bible. I offer this all the time. If you guys think I say something crazy from up here, or if you think I say something awesome, I would love to talk to you about it. I'm a big fan of, I'm not a fan of coffee. It's dirt water. But I'm a big fan of sitting down over coffee and talking about things, all right? Big fan of that setting. I love talking about the Bible. I mean, it's, not a small part of my life. But for right now, the setting that we're in, man, of course I'm going to tell you, if people are more receptive and more excited and more open and searching in a way that they haven't seemed to search in a while as a blanket, general, statistically true statement, please go talk to people about the Bible. Throw it out there. There's a desire, a hunger, and a thirst right now. The problem with this, and the reason a lot of people will often hear that call to action, and myself included will feel a bit of a reservation about it, is because of the way that normally goes. Tell me if you've ever felt one of these things happen where you throw a introduction out to some kind of spiritual conversation, and then almost instinctively, almost reflexively, you or them jump to the thing that you guys definitely disagree on more hostilely than any other thing you could have picked to talk about. Has anybody experienced that? You throw something out and maybe it's someone who already believes in God, and you and them probably line up on over 90% of your beliefs about who God is and who you are. And as soon as you guys start talking about it, what do you jump to? The miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit, and whether or not they still happen today or not. And well, they grew up deeply entrenched in that tradition. You grew up deeply entrenched in this other, and both of you are going to come to the Bible with some presuppositions, and usually probably not going to get to bloodshed, but emotional blood will be shed because you guys are both going to fight for the way that you grew up. Or maybe because that's a pretty scarring experience. It doesn't have to happen too many times. But maybe because of the fear of the battle, you swing all the way the other way. And you just jump in and you try and have a conversation with somebody about the Bible, and very quickly you just default to, you're good, we're good, we're all good. Everything's good as long as we don't fight. Listen, this is like a spiritual fight or flight, okay? We have a tendency to want to dive into the most divisive and difficult issues first and either fight with people or just avoid it altogether and flee as quickly as we can because fighting is bad. I think the Bible can give us wisdom. I think the Bible can teach us a way that is more beneficial, okay? Jesus, in Matthew chapter 9, told his disciples that the fields are white for harvest, that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. In essence, Jesus was talking about a time very much like the time we're in right now. People are open, but not a lot of people want to go do this work. And I think part of the reason for that is the way that it typically goes. These conversations are difficult to have. They are entangled with emotion and difficulty, and navigating them can require some forethought at the very least. So I want to know, can the Bible give us wisdom on how to have these kinds of conversations? Jesus encourages his disciples to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So he seems to think that there is a right way, or a best way, I should say, to have these conversations. What does the rest of the Bible hold out in that regard? Let me pause and throw a little bit of a disclaimer at you. We're going to look at some stuff, and as a person who sits on a pew with animals, children, distractions, I know that listening to an entire lesson can be a difficult thing, whether they're your kids or someone else's, okay? Whether your stomach is growling and you're hungry, or there are a million things that jump into our mind. We're going to talk about a couple different things, and if you're having a hard time keeping track of everywhere we're going, I'm going to try and do a really good job of summarizing and recapping. But if you check in randomly and you hear things like the Enuma Elish and ancient documents, don't be afraid. There's a reason why we're looking at this, and I'm going to do my best to keep us all on the same page as we run through this. Because here's the truth. I find this stuff fascinating. And what I increasingly find is I am the minority, all right? Ancient documents written by ancient people and how they relate to the Bible is a field of study that is small. There's a reason for that. But I'm going to try and keep us kind of on task and see why that's beneficial to us this morning, okay? So let's dive right in. Genesis chapter 1. We are asking, can the Bible give us wisdom on how to have spiritual conversations with people, on how to evangelize in a way that is effective and encouraging and has positive outcomes rather than the fight or flight that we normally experience? Genesis chapter 1, we've got the creation account. Genesis 1 tells a story, okay? It starts with a picture, and we've talked about this before, a picture of God, the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. And then, through his divine ordinance, right, God speaks. His speech orders the creation. And we've talked about this a bit before, but when you break down Genesis chapter 1, you see this systematic creation where on day 1, 2, and 3, with his words, God forms the places in the earth, the light and the dark, the sky and the sea, the land. And then on day 4, 5, and 6, he fills those correlating spaces. So day 1, he created light and dark. That's the space. And in day 4, he fills that with the sun, the moon, and the stars. They match. On day 2, the sky and the sea. And on day 5, the birds and the fish. They match. He forms and he fills. And then on day 3, the land. And then on day 6, it's plants and animals. Or it's the land and the plants, and then it's animals and humans and all that. So he forms it, and then he fills it. There's this beautiful order in creation. We've also talked in the past about the way that God decides to create humans in his own image. The way that God decides to describe his partnership with humans as ruling the world together with them. Now, this is what's really interesting. When you look at other ancient creation narratives, the story that other ancient people told themselves about how the world came to be, they're weirdly similar. They're weirdly similar. In fact, there's the Egyptian story describes their God as rising up from the waters. So he starts he's within the waters and he rises up from the waters. And then through some act of power, he creates and separates the world in the way that it is now. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story, they tell a story about their god, whose name I cannot remember right now. Oh my goodness. Marduk, their god Marduk. And Marduk has, in order to create the world, has to fight this dragon goddess named Tiamat. Okay? This is kind of a crazy story. All right? Marduk is this Babylonian god, and he has to battle Tiamat. And in order to create the world and make it habitable, he has to slay Tiamat and cut her body in half and spread half of her body across the sky, and that becomes our sky, and spread the other half across the land and use her various entrails to create the rivers and streams and mountains and vegetation. It's weird, right? What's really interesting about this, okay? You take these creation accounts, the other ancient creation accounts, and the biblical account in Genesis 1. You're going to notice some similarities. One of the things you notice is this ancient Egyptian god starts in the waters. Well, the ancient story in the Bible has a god starting above the waters. Similar, but not the same. You also notice that this God creates and he orders the world. Well, in the Babylonian story, Marduk also creates. He orders things and structures and forms things. But again, not quite the same. So what's happening here? Because these ancient documents, these Babylonian creation stories, the Egyptian creation narratives, they were all existing around the time that the Bible was written, okay? And the Bible could have very easily, when God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, he could have sat down and said, listen, you're going to need to tell everyone why all those dumb creation myths are wrong. Tell them. Make sure they know Marduk isn't a real god and that Tiamat is not why we have land and sky. And make sure you refute every point line by line so they know. It's interesting. It doesn't do that. Instead, in some small way, it almost validates the fact that a creation story is an important thing to people. It validates that there is a divine presence in creation, that divinity, something outside of our world, created this world. It validates that creation has some kind of order. But then it subverts the things that are said in these myths about who this God is and who these people are. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine for a second if your entire worldview was the story of Marduk and Tiamat. In that worldview, how are things made? Violence. How are things sustained? Bloodshed. What is true creative power? The ability to use the sword to make your world the way you want it. Compare that to the truth of Genesis 1. How does our God create? It's not violence. It's not bloodshed. It's just with a word. What is true power in Genesis 1? It's It's an ordered creation made by a loving creator. See, the Bible didn't feel the need to attack every problem with these ancient creation myths. Rather, it affirms some intuition that the ancient people had about how this world came to be. And then it subverts what creation is truly about. And it tells a much more powerful truth about who this God is and who we are in relation to him. This isn't the only place that this happens, but it's a very prominent place. Another story that we have a lot of other ancient narratives about is in Genesis 6. In Genesis 6, we're given the flood narrative. The flood narrative about Noah, right? And God and the flood and the destruction of the whole earth. We know the story, right? In Genesis chapter 6, the whole world is full of violence. It says that the only intents of men's heart was evil all the time. Nothing but evil inside of humans. And then Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He was like the one bright spot in this world full of darkness, the whole world full of violence, and people constantly hurting and killing each other. And then God tells Noah, I'm going to send a flood. Later in Peter's writing, he talks about Noah as a preacher of righteousness. And so Noah seems to have had this mission of build a boat and get some people on it. He gets his family, and that's about it. God ends up sending the flood. Noah and his family are safe inside the ark. The flood destroys the world, wipes it out, uncreates all the things that were created before. And then the flood waters subside. Noah and his family walk out into a new world with the same commission that God gave Adam and Eve at the beginning of being fruitful and multiplying. Now, this story of Noah is really interesting. You know, you have your hero, you have your task, you have your incident. In our ancient Mesopotamian and Babylonian myths, they also have a lot of these same plot points. They tell very much a similar story. There is a movement by the gods to destroy the earth. There is a hero in the story, Gilgamesh, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and other heroes in these other myths, who has to save the whole world. There is a flood, obviously. There is a boat. There are 8 people on the boat. The flood waters subside, and this hero has to start back over in the world. On its face, those feel like the same story. And again, when Moses was given this story, these ancient myths would have already been around. And it's sort of an affirmation. Yeah, there was a flood. It did happen. There was a truth behind that story. But what truth is being held out by the Bible's flood narrative that does not present itself in these other bizarre ancient stories? Well, why do the ancient stories tell that the gods flooded the earth? The Babylonian myth says that the gods were completely tired of the noise that humans made. Humans were far too noisy, and it was driving them nuts, so they sent a flood. One of the gods, of many, snuck down, or snook, as my kids say, snuck down and told Gilgamesh, say, hey, they're about to wipe everything out. You're going to have to trick them, deceive them, sneaky build this boat, because I don't know that they're being completely fair to you guys. And so through deception and trickery, and then Gilgamesh has to rescue the whole world. Okay, the disposition of the God of the Bible is drastically different. And we've gone over this before, but in Genesis chapter 6, God is not described as angry a single time. In Genesis chapter 6, in the account of the flood, our God is not described as irate that humans are doing these things that they're doing. He's not upset with humans. He is broken-hearted. He's remorseful. He's devastated. Well, why is he so devastated? Because we ruined all of his stuff? No. Because we're killing ourselves right in front of him as his children. We're dying and doing it to ourselves right in front of him. The things he gave us for good, we've turned into weapons for evil. 2 chapters before that, in Genesis 4, it talks about how, in the story of Cain and Abel, God says that the blood of Abel cried out to him from the ground when he's talking to Cain. We're just 2 chapters later, and the whole world is full of violence. Imagine the bloodshed. What are the cries like in the ears of this God? The disposition of this God is a loving, gracious Father who will also enact judgment. The disposition of the gods in other accounts is annoyed, kind of sick of it, ready to be done with these gross little human things. Listen, while the Bible affirms the story of the flood, it affirms the truth of a divine movement behind the flood, it affirms the truth of a remnant of humans being saved, it stands as a subversion of many of the truths that are within that story. This wasn't an annoyed God, it was a loving God. This wasn't an angry God, it was a brokenhearted God. This wasn't a sneaky God telling one man that you have to save everything with some secret knowledge that you got from the gods. It's a God who told a man to tell everyone that judgment was coming. This wasn't a secret message. It was a message for everybody. Listen, this happens all over the Bible. There's an affirmation of some good things that are true, and then, like a mirror, there is a subversion of the things that are not true in the rest of that story. There's another spot where Israel, fast forward a couple thousand years, Israel's had this time period of judges. This is in 1 Samuel. And they look around and they decide, we want a king to rule over us. Well, Samuel's offended, but God's not. He said, they're rejecting me as king. Go ahead and give him a king. And what's really weird about this is a couple thousand years earlier, or a couple hundred years earlier, when Moses was writing the law in Deuteronomy, he writes laws for how Israel should have a king. That's weird. If they weren't supposed to have a king, why did they have laws about it? Well, because having a king wasn't the problem. When you look at the laws about how Israel ought to have a king, I believe these are in Deuteronomy 17, there are things that a king is and is not supposed to do. Primarily, a king over Israel, according to the law, is not supposed to gain a lot of wealth. That's a bit counterintuitive. Usually kings have a lot of wealth. Secondly, Israelite kings, according to the law, are not meant to amass an army. That's confusing, because I thought a king was like the leader of the army. Thirdly, the king is meant to be the most knowledgeable person in all of Israel of the law. I thought kings employed priests for that. The Bible affirms a king. Yeah, have a king. But do it differently, because you're a different people. And then Israel stood as a light to the nations of how to do things God's way. It didn't sit there and argue about how evil and awful and that every king, and would you believe Nebuchadnezzar and how he doesn't even name drop. It just says we're going to do things differently. Okay, look at Acts chapter 17, which is where Hunter read for us. I think this is probably one of the most pertinent examples in this conversation. Paul, perpetually on the run, teaching people about the gospel and then getting chased out of town for it, ends up in Athens. Sometime when you have time, compare and contrast Paul and Silas in Berea and Paul in Athens from chapter 17, verse 10 through 15 in Berea, and then compare and contrast that with how Paul describes these Athenian people when he gets there. In verse 16, it says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him, and he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, what does this babbler wish to say? Others said, he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. For you bring some strange things to our ears, and we wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. We're just given a religious profile on these people, and it's not a glowing report card, okay? They're interested. Some of them say Paul's crazy. He's talking crazy talk. Some of them are interested because it's new, and really if you take the religious temperature of Athens during the day, it was conspiracy theory-ish, okay? It wasn't necessarily that they wanted the truth. They just wanted a plausible truth, and they wanted to hear something new and exciting. See the correlation. They weren't conspiracy theorists. They were religious theorists, and they just wanted to hear all the theories, okay? They didn't want to hear, they spent all of their time wanting to hear something new and exciting. Now, Paul steps into this conversation in the Areopagus, which would have been a large place full of idols, just like Paul mentions. And you would expect Paul, in the spirit of the Old Testament, maybe even the spirit of the prophet Jeremiah, to show up and say, don't you guys know these things are nothing? They're rocks and wood. They're pretend you made these things, like we talked about in Romans. You're worshiping the creation and not the creator. I mean, this would have been in step with Paul's training as a Pharisee. It would have been in step with Paul's study and knowledge of the Old Testament, of the prophets, of the law. It would have made perfect sense, and he would have been fully justified in that perspective with these people in Athens. But Paul shows up in the middle of the Areopagus. Oh, he also could have called him lazy, because not only were they doing it wrong, they were doing it for the wrong reasons. Wrong attitude, wrong worship, a lot of wrong. Verse 22, Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I pass along and observe the objects of your worship, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. And what therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you, the God that made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Listen, Paul shows up, and look what he does. Look what he does. The first words out of his mouth are a full-blown affirmation of their religion. He shows up and he says, yeah, you guys are super religious. But like, was that even a true statement? They were kind of religious at best. The ancient understanding is this altar to the unknown God was likely an Athenian way of insurance. Just in case we missed one, we don't want to make them angry, so we'll just throw up this altar to the unknown God, and if we missed one, then when they get here, we'll say, no, that one was for you. We forgot your name or something. I don't know. Like, that was kind of the idea, okay? Just in case. Paul shows up and he says, what you worship without knowing, that's what I proclaim. Time out. Did he just give the Athenians credit for worshiping the God of the Bible? He absolutely did. Is that a true statement? Like, not really. They didn't even know him. They certainly weren't sitting there going, well, that's for the Jewish God. No, they had no idea. Paul demonstrates like unreasonable levels of affirmation for these people and their religion. All right? Paul demonstrates outrageous amounts of graciousness towards interpreting what these people are doing, to the point that it feels like he's almost being dishonest. He's not. He's just finding the good in what these people are doing. And then, as he holds up like a mirror before them, the truth. Because that God is Lord of all, and he doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. And he doesn't really even need your hands, because you're not holding him up. He's holding you up. Every breath you breathe, every move you make is from him. Listen, what Paul does here is an absolute masterclass in affirm and subvert, okay? Affirm the good that you see in somebody, and then subvert it. Not with arguments, but with the truth. the truth that we have in the Scripture. This is what I want you to take with you. Number one, right now is a better time than it has been in a long time to start a spiritual conversation with somebody. The fields are white for harvest. Number two, when you do this, do it with wisdom. Use this biblical method of affirming the good things and subverting the things that are wrong by telling the truth. 2 steps, maybe 3 steps. Number one, talk to people. Talk to people. Start the conversation. Most of us know how to be nice, okay? Most of us. Some of us, a little more aggressive than others. But listen, most of us know how to be kind, all right? Really, the ones that don't know how to be kind are younger than 5. But listen, talk to people. Start the conversation. There is more desire and there are more open hearts right now than there have been in a long time. Step 2, find the good. Find the good in the person you're talking to and start with that. Start right there, okay? Let me explain what I mean by find the good, okay? If you have, let's just take it outside of people who believe in God or not. And let's go all the way, to another part of the world and look at maybe Islam or Hinduism or a religion that would feel very foreign to us. If they proclaim that there are forces outside of this world that are impacting this world, do we agree with that? Yeah. I mean, I don't agree with the names or exactly, but hold on, we're starting to find the good. Listen, you are very religious, Paul might say. Let's talk about some of these things in your religion. Ask some questions. Give some answers. Read the Bible. First thing we've got to do is talk to people. Secondly, we've got to find the good in them. When you are able to affirm somebody, it's a disarming thing. When someone tells you good job, it's really hard to fight with that. Yeah, good, I did. Thank you. Right? Like, what else are you going to say? Right? Find the good in people. Because if there is anything good, it's from God. If they say anything true, it's from God. Not all of that is true, but the things that are true, you can affirm those because God is truth. So what is true, and true is from God. That's it. Find the good in the people. Sometimes it'll be harder than others, but always try and start finding the good. And then thirdly, tell the truth. Your challenge is not to dismantle every argument and break down every character flaw. Your job is to hold up a mirror to the people you're speaking with. This is how the Bible interacts with all these other ancient stories. It didn't feel the need to disprove the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Enuma Elish. It simply held up the truth and allowed you to see the very clear differences. So hold up the truth. Tell the truth. You don't do that hatefully. You don't have to do that aggressively. You don't even necessarily have to address the things they're talking about. God's word is living and active. You hold the truth up as a mirror. It'll let people see what is really going on. I think that there's, we're running out of time. I heard someone say once that the Romans had a God for everything, and they were right, because God is in everything. That's the kind of sentiment that I'm talking about. I think the ultimate example of this is Jesus. When Jesus came to earth, he became a man, right? Well, yeah, he affirmed a lot about us by doing that, didn't he? I mean, Jesus showed up, and he came to this earth, and he lived a perfect life. Well, what does he tell us? That being human is not sinful. All right, there we go. He just affirmed our humanity. What else did he tell us? He says that the Bible tells us that he was tempted in all ways, just like we were. The Bible tells us that we have a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses because of this. We're told about Jesus that he experienced all the things that we experience. But he did it a little bit differently, yet without sin. Jesus didn't have to stand here and condemn every single sin, every single way. He stands here as a mirror, a reflection, a standard. He showed up. He affirmed so many things about being human. And then he told the truth. He stands as a mirror, reflecting ourselves to ourselves. He stands in some ways in judgment, not with his words, but man, with his actions. And on his last days, in those last days, with his words. Listen, then he dies on the cross. And does that not affirm the end that is coming for all humans? Like, death is the end. It's coming. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's the thing that's coming for all of us. But he subverted those expectations quite a bit too, didn't he? Because he didn't stay in the ground. He rose from the dead. He told us there's a new way, a better way to be human. And if you follow him, you too can have that resurrection from the dead, this forgiveness of sins. Listen, Jesus in John chapter 1 was described as being full of grace and full of truth. We could have just done this in 2 minutes if I just read that verse and tell you that's how you ought to talk to people. Be full of grace. Affirm the good. Find the good in somebody. And then be full of truth. Tell them the truth. Show them the truth of the Bible. And please, please, the fields are white for harvest. Go find somebody and just strike up a conversation with them, because people are searching right now in a way that they have not been in a long time. And you might be one of those people, right? You might be one of those people who's searching. That's why we do this invitation at the end of every lesson. And so if you need to learn more about Jesus and obey the gospel, you can come and let us put the Bible in your hand and show you the truth of God's word. If you need prayers of the church, this is also a great time for that. Whatever you need, come forward and let us know while we stand and sing.